Hello and welcome to this Google Hangout, which is part of the Mahindra Rise Prize program on the subject of World Class from India, which is part of a Google Hangout series, which is aimed at encouraging innovative thoughts. So all of you who are joining this Google Hangout, we have a very, very eminent, preeminent panel, should I say. We're going to be talking for some time, and then we're going to take questions from all of you. So the more interactive this is, the more fun it's going to be. So good morning, good evening, and wherever you're joining, we hope you enjoy this conversation we're going to have. We have with us Anand Mahindra, who's chairman of the Mahindra Group, and Chanda, Kochhar, managing director and CEO of the ICICI Bank. We have Arun, Maira, former member of the Planning Commission. Also joining us from Gurgaon is the managing director of Google India, Rajan Anandan. Rajan, hi, and thank you very much to all our panelists. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Let's get started. Since I've been given the job of starting off this conversation, I just want to start by with some opening thoughts, which perhaps you can take off on in the course of your conversation. So, when we are talking about actually doing something world class from India, there's a presumption that we would have to innovate at some point of time. So, I want to draw a direct link between doing something world class from India to the idea of innovation in the course of this conversation. So just 5-6 quick starting points to provoke thought this morning. The first is, do we see innovation as a luxury in India? Do we see it as a choice rather than as a necessity? I'd like to hear from you on that. Secondly, is there a growing sense of complacency when you reach a certain scale of business or you achieve things in life, which sometimes make us very myopic in the way we look at things? I mean, look at BlackBerry, how they would have looked at their business before the iPhone came. The third is, and it's more complex, and it's for business leaders like you, you need to look at this entire issue. Can you really spawn innovation, or is the challenge to locate it? Because I know that many business leaders want to incubate innovation. But then there's another responsibility that you identify innovation and then grab the opportunity. The fourth is, how desperate are we as a people? I've often found that when I read up on the most disruptive technologies, then they've always been done by people, and I was reading up something this morning, done by people who are fairly desperate. I mean, I hear that, for example, in terms of innovative messaging, and don't get me wrong, in terms of innovative messaging techniques, I'm told drug traffickers are often the most most innovative. No, there's a thought process going on there. For example, counterfeiters, I'm told, use the most high-tech digital technology to a point where they're actually making certain technologies used in printing money redundant, or they're challenging that. So how desperate are you? And does that desperation exist in places other than the so-called dark corners of our society? And the fifth and last point is, what happens to an established leader once it accepts an innovator? First, does it have the openness to accept an innovator, whether a person is in his teens or 20s? And then after that, how does he just co-opt the innovator within his environment, or does he give him a different environment in which to flower? I think these are some thoughts which come up to my mind, and which I think maybe the audience is interested in. So since Rajan is outside, and I'd like to start off with Rajan. Good morning. I just put some opening thoughts out there, and maybe you'd like to take off on any of them as a starting point of this conversation. Then we'll go around the table.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. Let me start with, is it a luxury or is it a necessity? If you look at the potential that India has, as well as the challenges that we have, my view, and I think our view, is very few of these large-scale problems and opportunities can be solved or addressed without massive innovation, right? So if you look at core sectors like healthcare, like education, like energy, like infrastructure, the reality is we probably will never be able to build enough schools, hire enough teachers, and so on and so forth to roll out a traditional model of, let's call it, education 1.0 to be able to meet those needs. So we need to actually innovate radically to be able to, let's say, really address the education challenges that we have, whether it's K through 12 or higher ed and so on. So firstly, I strongly believe that, we must innovate at a much, much faster scale to be able to address the challenges that we have. So that's one. I think second, world class. One of the things I've been thinking, what is world class? And I think world class really is, as you said, Arnab, it's innovations from, or world class from India, innovations from India that address very large challenges at world scale. Right? That's sort of, to me, what world class is. And the great thing about India is we have so many problems and opportunities that are at world scale. We have 1.2 billion people, and any specific thing that you pick is not a 10, 20, 30 million people problem or a 1 million business problem. You're talking about hundreds of millions of consumers and users and so on and so forth. So my view is, I'll take that first point that you said is it's absolutely an innovation. And I actually think, by the way, innovation world class in India will, in the near term, will probably be less about disruptive technologies, but more about disruptive business models. And the reason I say that is, if you look at the state of technologies across industries, we're at a point now where we've got technologies that can, if assembled in the right way, can begin to address some of these very large opportunities. And I think one great example, two great examples that I have. One is Airtel. Airtel is now among the top 5 telecom companies in the world. And they're one of the most profitable telecom companies in the world, despite having ARPUs that are 1/10 global averages, right? And what they did extraordinarily well is really radically change the business model. Another great example is UID. I'm a huge fan of UID. And how did we get UID done? It was actually not by going and inventing a whole set of new computer science. It's by putting together, in a very, very smart way, existing technologies that we have with the right business model. I'm hoping that will continue to roll out. But those are some thoughts around world class in India.
Yeah, so it's doable, it's achievable. But then, Anand, you have a Facebook, you have an Apple, you have a Samsung, you have a Google. What's, in your view, what's keeping an Indian brand from sort of emerging similarly at the same scale on the global level?
As you can imagine, that's something that occupies us every day. Why doesn't this happen faster? Why doesn't it happen sooner? When I have Tech Mahindra boards, for example, I still lament the fact that by and large Indian software companies are like sweatshops for brains. Why is it that some young, hungry 18-year-old in a Ivy League dorm in the northeast part of the US comes out with the world-breaking app, the new world sort of beater in apps, and why isn't it that we can't do this here? So that is a preoccupation. And you made a very interesting point. You said you had read this morning about desperation.
Yes.
I love that. I love that phrase. That I've not heard. It's not a nice sounding word, so maybe we don't use it for that reason. But desperation is right. By that standard, given that we have largest number of the world's poor here, some of the world's most malnutrition, desperation is a way of life here. Why aren't we then one of the most innovative people? And in my opinion, it is really about competition. It is about allowing the ecosystem here to compete with the world for everything. So whether it's FDI coming in, whether it's allowing companies to come in, first of all, we must make competition a way of life here. If you really look at the past, why we were stagnating as an economy, it was because there was no competition. Everybody used to ask us, why aren't you spending more on R&D in India?
Right.
Why do you spend if you have a license to produce and allocate goods as opposed to competition? So first simple point I want to make is that we have to make sure that the barriers to business vanish here. Completely vanish in terms of allowing the world's best to compete here. Number two, we always we seem to have a kind of bias against consumerism, against people consuming more. Somehow there's an inbuilt socialism in us still. But if you really look at the most innovation that comes out, it is from encouraging people to consume. And when people consume, they want more, they choose, they want the best, and that's when you suddenly get innovation coming in. Now you combine that with desperation and people wanting to make a better life. I think we have a very, very potent combination here. If we can get competition in, if we can encourage consumerism, and then you have people here who do want to make a better life, more people in this country wanting to make a better life than anywhere else, I think we have a very potent combination.
I'm glad you took off on that point, because I don't know, and I throw this up to Chanda and Arun, you could take it up, either of you. I mean, what is the biggest deterrent to innovation? It would be that you're risk averse. The biggest deterrent to entrepreneurship. I'm sure you deal with entrepreneurs at every level. Are we risk averse? Is that genuinely a problem, or is there something else in the system rather than our own response to situation? Chanda, Arun, I'm glad you're passing it on. This is more polite than it usually is on television.
Well, I would like to come to that, but yes, first reaffirming two things. One is you asked about India. Do we need innovation? And as Rajan said, and you've said too, the gap between what we need in India and what we have is so large. How are we going to bridge this gap?
Yeah.
We are short of resource and we need very large outcomes. This gap creates, I can use a different word, not desperation, a tension between a desire to do something, to have something, and what we have in terms of where we are and the resources we have. So the understanding, the study of innovation all over the world in various fields over the last 30 years has found that the necessary condition for innovation is a creative tension. I'm turning the word desperation into a creative tension. It's this thing that I'm going to find a solution to this, even if I don't know at the moment how or have the resources to do it. And that's when you start finding novel ways. So novelty is a great aspect of innovation. The other, to distinguish between luxury, as you said, and necessary innovation, is utility. And I find too much of things that are being celebrated as innovation, they're just novel. But what use are they to anybody in our lives and in our lives? So utility and novelty. The third, I must add, is frugality. In our country, the innovations must provide healthcare, like he said, or education or water at costs and prices that people can afford where they are today. Okay? Also, we need frugality for the whole world in terms of use of resources in producing the results. So novelty, utility, plus frugality in both aspects of it, price, that's cost frugality, and use of resource frugality is what innovation has to be about. Now we did find, I'm saying now we means working the last 5 years with the National Innovation Council, part of Planning Commission, what are the conditions required to ensure that we'll have more innovations, more people with their creative tension are able to produce outcomes that everyone wants. We found the following. One is that innovators, as they start, they have the idea and the desire, they don't get money support easily, and Chanda, you could comment on that. Okay. Looking at the financial structure and systems available in the country, that last mile means the person who needs the least, because he's just starting with an idea, finds it very difficult to someone to fund it. In the United States, the venture capital and the financial system give risk loans for amounts which in our case are equivalent to 50 times. Means you have to have a need which is 50 times what you really want for someone to take an interest in what you have. So that gap is not being bridged. So you got these ideas, but until they can prove and get the attention of somebody who's less risk averse, it's the risk averseness in the financial system for various reasons, which prevents the innovator from getting the funds at an early stage. So this we found clearly. The second thing very, very clearly is that innovations, as was mentioned by I think Rajan and I would say it again, it's about a combination of various institutions working together. The sort of innovation that we're talking about is not an invention of a product, it's the delivery of something in the hands of somebody. And as Rajan said, the thing might have been invented, but you got to invent a process of getting it to people. So therefore, India, by the way, is ranked world class and the top of the world in business model innovation. So they had an award last year in Paris, international award, for 10 best innovations that have changed the lives of large numbers of people. 5 of them are from India. And there no new science. You talk of Arvind Eye Hospital, there's no new science.
All of this worries me, Arun.
Why?
Because on the one side, Anand says, and he rightly says, if there has got to be desperation to achieve something, it has to be in India. Because there are so many people who want to rise, both in their own standards of living and in terms of contributing to society. Second point you make, and this conversation is really going in an interesting direction. You make the point that at an individual level, there are innovators in this country.
Yes.
So I want to just throw that to Chanda, that if this is the situation, first I want you to respond on whether you feel the financial sector is risk averse. Therefore, those who are the risk takers don't get enough support. But also with this kind of an ecosystem where you have the right ingredients to actually do great things. This recently released Global Innovation Index says that India has slipped another 10 places. We are now 76 out of 100 countries.
So, I have to button. I think
so
that's bogus survey.
You think so?
Yes, I'll explain later, but Chanda, please answer.
They're not wearing a government hat when you say.
No. I'm wearing a very intellectual hat, studying how do you examine the quality of an innovation system.
No, but still, my question is, why are we slipping? Even if we're not rising.
Actually, I'm saying to you, the other evidence, anecdotal evidence, actually people are saying India is rising. But these surveys, we have to look into the design of the survey.
We haven't created those global corporations yet, and we have the potential to. So the conversation, I just want to lead it in that direction.
Sure.
You want to respond to some of what you said?
Yeah. So I think, we all spoke about the important blocks that actually are great ingredients for India to innovate. And one very important block or ingredient which we haven't touched upon is actually the Indian consumer. So, when we come out with innovative thoughts and ideas in our sector, we've seen that the adoption of the Indian consumer to new products, new ideas, new innovative ways of doing banking has always exceeded our expectations. So, in a way, actually, in India, we have the opportunity to take any innovation and give it the kind of scale that no other country in the world would offer us. Now, the second is, just coming to, is innovation really a necessity? I mean, whether you call it a constraint, a challenge, or whatever, I think it's a necessity. Again, I would just draw examples from the banking sector. If we all have to make banking inclusive, and we as one single bank hold today about 20 million accounts, which have a deposit base between $1 and $2. Now, if you have to make these 20 million accounts with $2 deposit base per account, you have to innovate ways of reducing the cost of doing business with them. Otherwise, that business will never be viable. So I think those are the things that actually lead to innovation in our country. They make it affordable, they make it scalable. Now, do we say whether the country is slipping or not? In fact, I think, we need not always think of the big bang ideas.
Yeah.
Are we looking at, in the country, are we taking existing ideas and converting them into business models that are by themselves innovative, and those are business models which are the next practices for the world to follow. So, yeah, so I mean, again, one can give very simple examples, but India did not innovate the ATM. India did not innovate the Facebook.
Right.
But it was only when we brought in ATMs into India and made them talk in 15 regional languages to the people in rural India that we today have millions of transactions getting done on the ATM. Well, Facebook always existed. But if you now would go and ask around the world, we were the first bank that said, you do everything on social media, but can you complete a banking transaction on social media? And we made that happen. So, today, therefore, I think the world can look at India and say, India is probably one of the countries that is most ahead in terms of the percentage of transactions that the consumer does on electronic channels rather than doing it on the branches. So I think there are various ways where you take existing ideas, you make them affordable, you make them scalable, and thereby you actually substantially change business models. Talking, of course, about the constraint that Arun spoke about, I think what really lacks in India is two things. One is our entire education system is still not that research and creativity oriented. I think that's somewhere where if we have to build innovation as a culture, we have to build it in people before they join organizations. I mean, we as organizations try to build an innovation culture, but does our education system build that? I think we need to do much more there. The second is that, we still do not have the financial ecosystem, those angels who actually are willing to put their passion and money behind it. Now, this is not necessarily the banking system. The banking system is not necessarily actually supposed to get into venture funding. But yes, overall, do we have those mentors? Do we have those angels who would actually nurture these ideas and take these along?
Yeah. No, I think we are very good at co-opting success. Once there is success, which happens. So we are all looking for the next $1 billion valuations. But I think you raised some interesting points. I just want to steer away on another point. You see, Arun made some points, and we've often talked about this concept of jugad. I think when I'm hearing both of you, in a way you're saying we're very good at taking some technologies and implementing them at levels where you would not expect those technologies to exist. That's what I hear. And I'm also hearing you say that we are very good at doing innovations at a very basic ground level. Now let me provoke your thought on that, Arun, and let me throw that to Rajan. Rajan, I hope you are not feeling excluded. There is no and feel free to butt in.
Absolutely.
Feel free to butt in whenever you feel into the conversation. No, Rajan, you know, I want to spend some time on this. That are we too self-complimentary when we say very often that we are very good at jugad? You know, jugad being that ultimate term for anything that we get things together and we make things work at low cost, which is a very good thing to do. But is jugad necessarily cutting edge? And can we do something at a cutting edge global level if we constantly compliment ourselves for being good at jugad? Rajan.
So I think, look, you know, jugad means many things to many people. I guess to me it means last minute execution. Right, we get it done last minute, whatever it takes. So look, I think it's good because, you know, it's good in that, you know, we can get stuff done, even if it's last minute, even if, you know, there's no planning. But to get to be world class in anything, whether it's in process, in technology, I think two things are required, right? That are not really at the heart of jugad. One is long-term planning, right? And the second is, you know, having core processes that scale. I mean, those two things are sort of the antithesis of jugad. And I think, you know, whether it's at a nation building level, whether it's at a company level, whether it's at an, you know, entrepreneurship ecosystem level, I think we need to probably, you know, really, you know, spend a lot more time thinking about how do we build a long-term view on things, right? You know, there are a few companies, obviously, you know, I think Anand and Chanda are great examples of CEOs who have longer-term plans, but, you know, most Indian, you know, companies, actually most companies globally, I mean, the US is even worse now, is, you know, you're living quarter to quarter, right? You're not thinking, you know, 5 years out, and you're not thinking about how to shape a new industry or how to kind of go build a very large new business or market. So I think that needs to get a lot more ingrained. And I think the other one is processes, right? So a lot of people believe that, you know, innovation just happens. I mean, innovation doesn't happen. Right? You know, if you study some of the most innovative leaders, entrepreneurs, scientists in the world, I mean, there are processes. Now, you know, all of them have different processes, but I think, you know, it's important for us to actually get much better at processes, but not processes that are, let's say, production processes. I think many of our companies are very, very good at that, but processes that lend themselves to innovation. So, for instance, in our business, which is a software business, right, one of the most important processes is the product launch and iterate process, right? You launch a product, how quickly are you iterating, how quickly are you, and if you don't nail that process, you're never going to build a large consumer internet company. Right, and that's discipline, you know, and you stick to it and you kind of drive it. So I think jugad, you know, is good in that it's helped us to execute, and we believe we can just about get anything done. But I think on the other hand, it misses some of these core elements that are really required for large scale disruptive innovation.
And yeah, so that's good. I'm glad you said that. Yes, Anand.
Jugad, I've been one of the biggest critics of jugad for the last couple of years, and that's ironic because, you know, the way it came about, the first device that spawned that term was some kind of jerry-built contraption in the north that used to roll on highways, where they used to take one of our engines and transmissions and put wooden sort of platforms around these wheels from somewhere else, gearbox from somewhere else. That was a jugad. That's how it came about. So I should almost claim IPR over it rather than hit on it. But it really bothers me that we have become so smug about look how good we are. The problem with jugad is it's make do. Frugality, frugal engineering, the ideal should be more for less, not just make do.
That's
the problem with jugad is that it comes, and ironically that comes out of desperation from a lack of resources. So it is innovation 1.0, comes from desperation because of lack of resources. You jerry build something and you see let's see what comes out of it. I'll do the best I can. What you really have to do is say, this is what I want to do. This is my world-class idea. Now I'm going to build with constraints. So using constraint-led innovation is very different from jugad. You're saying, I want simplicity. I want constraints because that will provoke me. but my ideal is nothing less than the best.
No, but how do you achieve both? Let's take a situation here today. Okay, let me push you a little bit on that. And Arun, I don't agree with Anand because I thought you were on two different.
No,
you agree with him?
Yes, because I'm glad we're bringing out the distinction between just ad hoc, done, and over.
Okay.
What backwards?
And you're saying, okay, this worked here. How can I improve this and make it a larger solution and make it a business actually?
That means you come forward. I tell you, there's a experiment. I was racking my brain to say, what's the right word we need to move from jugad, which rhymes with it. There's a lovely one, since three of us are Bombayas here.
Yeah.
There is a lovely word called jhakas. That means superb. Wow. So one has to say, how do I build something that's jhakas? And if I don't have the resources, how do I improvise?
So that becomes a problem. So then we come back to the issue. There is desperation. We've been very happy with jugad at a very elementary level. But when we are pursuing the idea of world class, then we can no longer be very complacent about it, can we, Chanda? So we need the resources. How do we bridge? There may be many people watching this Google Hangout this morning who would ask that this is very good, but who's going to incubate it? I'm a risk taker. Is there a risk taker above out there who's willing to hold my hand?
Absolutely.
And I'm a risk taker, or is there a risk taker out there who says, first come through the, come through the whole process, be the one in a million who's already been through the rat race, then I'll hold your hand. Whereas there may be 10,000 out there who may be great innovators who need a helping hand out there. So we are coming down to the whole issue of resources, and the college students and younger people and those kind of 18-year-olds, I'm sure, Anand, are there in India as well. And they need a little sense of reassurance that the system is going to work for them. So where do we start, Chanda?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, that's probably one of the biggest thing that's lacking in our ecosystem. That do our 18-year-olds, who I'm sure are actually full of ideas, can look up there and say, I take this idea here and make it work. So yes. I genuinely think that is somewhere that we all as a country have to invest and make it happen.
When you say country, you mean government?
No, but just coming to resources and jugad, that's a different, a little bit of a different issue altogether. To say that we have lack of resources, everything, whether it's food, whether it's water, whether it's infrastructure, and so on.
Absolutely.
Jugad means that you just use whatever little resources you have and you make something happen.
Yeah.
To that extent, I think it's a great starting point.
Yeah.
But, do you say that because you have lack of resources, you will create a business model where these few resources become valuable to a large number of people? That's where innovation comes in. So you can use jugad as a great starting point, but if you become complacent and say this is where it is, then that's not innovation.
So let me take a very kind of specific odd example. Suppose there are a group of 10 top-end, top-notch medical students, right, or scientists who are 22, 23, 24-year-olds are out of med school, and they say, we want to spend the rest of our careers toward innovating towards, say cancer research. Right? Who is going to hold their hand if they want to incubate the idea and they want to own the idea? I think should they lean on the government?
Firstly, you're starting with, I want to do something with cancer research.
Right.
What we found is, actually, I mentioned to you the 5 innovations out of the 10 that were globally found to be the best innovations which have improved the lives of people in the world were from India. 4 of them are from the healthcare side. 2 I remember immediately is about Narayan Hardale, the heart operations, and the other, the Arvind Eye Care. There are 2 others. So just look at that. It is not a research. Here's a man here who said, why is it that there are people not getting treatment for their eyes in good time and so much blindness? The other was about the heart. So he's finding that the technology is there, but it's not delivering the outcomes that people want. So it's like was said earlier, the business model, the organization model, and anyone who's researched it, and there's now cases in Harvard based on this, it's designing the whole delivery system, the procurement of delivery system to produce these outcomes at affordable prices and very accessible. So innovations in organizational models, business models, delivery systems, Dabba comes to mind immediately, is India's quite good at that. However, when we looked at National Innovation Council, that people have got these ideas, and we found through the Honeybee network, which is run by the IIM in Ahmedabad, he said, Professor Arun, Anil Gupta, that he says, I think some 10 million. And he said, look, here you're sitting on a trove of experiments that people have proven in their own place. But no one is wishing to help these people to expand on these ideas. And we found, as we looked at it, that what was required was not just providing this product everywhere, but a delivery model, a business model to make it a business actually. So that's where we're coming back to Chanda, and she's quite right. It's not the banking system that one was talking about. It's what you said, the angel funders, the venture capitalists. So when I come back to a medical student, if he's saying, I want to research cancer and India is going to get innovations out of it, I'm afraid not. Someone says, I've got this problem here. I may not even be the best in cancer. I will find the best person in cancer and I will build a system to deliver solutions to people who have cancer problems.
There is a dichotomy here. On the one hand, we have the business model, the small dormitory innovation, which I agree with everything you're saying. But what if somebody does say, I want to work on cancer research? There seems to be a different world which we are giving up on. Rajan said that we are already good at business models and that's what India should do. I worry a little bit, why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't we be having white-coated Bell Labs or cancer researchers also? And it's a good question. I just want to ask you. You have an answer for that. I have an answer for the government, as he said.
Yes.
Because we don't have the large corporations like the Bell Labs of the old days that led innovation in the old days. But I think, frankly, Indians would also be very good at very linear, logical, left-brain, sequential research. Why aren't we getting enough of that?
Yeah, good. Let's look at the government thing. You mentioned Bell Labs. Government money, government projects funded Bell Labs. The government is a great customer for those things where there's risk and large amount of money is required to find a solution which will be good for the country in some way, defense or something else also. So what is lacking here in our country is that the government is not challenging our corporate labs to find solutions.
Providing partnerships or something.
Even today, DARPA, which is the US agency which funds, this is how it was. It says, okay, here's a bright guy in a university, you make a proposal that I want this research program to be funded. They will give you money if it's linked to a national challenge, and this is the nice part. No, but please let me complete.
Yeah.
It's not just to you. You will have to work with two other persons and organizations so that the whole thing comes about. It's not your research, there's a business cooperation.
Government led, you're saying?
Yes, yes.
So that's your answer.
No, but I'm not quite sure, government-led approaches, whether they will work. I mean, even in this budget, there are a number of proposals that encourage entrepreneurship. Mr. Jaitley keeps aside 10,000 crore rupees for this, then he keeps 200 crores for a network to promote innovation, 100 crores for this. I'm not sure. I mean, do we really feel convinced? Are those who are going to
evidence all over the world, including the United States and Silicon Valley, is that the government has got the biggest hand in it.
But
why are you not convinced? Why are you not convinced?
Because Mr. Maira, not that I have anything perennially against governments, but I do believe that some of the greatest innovations may come with zero government interference in our country. And I'm also looking at a new world out here, and I'd like Rajan to come in on this, but say today, we are speaking of innovation, Rajan, at a time when this whole Flipkart versus Amazon war, hopefully it will be heating up. Now that's an encouraging sign, Rajan, that Indian entrepreneurs and startups, right, a homemade company can lock horns with one of the biggest online retailers of the world. But that brings me back to my basic question. Are we very good at co-opting success when it happens? There could have been 1,000 Flipkarts in 1,000 other areas which we are probably not looking at. I want you to address that, Rajan, and also the question, because Arun and I have a little a mind disagree.
Yes.
If I may say so, on the role of the government.
Yeah, I'll start with that, but I also want to go back to around the angel funding ecosystem and the startup ecosystem. So I think, look, if you look at what has Flipkart done extraordinarily well, right? They have taken an e-commerce model that was very well established in the US, but they have adapted it in so many interesting ways to make it work in India, right? Which is what I think Chanda had mentioned, and they've done it at scale. India was the first country. In fact, Flipkart invented cash on delivery. Nobody else in the world did cash on delivery.
Absolutely.
Now I go to every emerging market in the world, they're all talking about cash on delivery, right? Flipkart was the first one to say, okay, if the logistics infrastructure doesn't exist, we will build it. I mean, that used to, that used to happen anywhere in the world, and so on and so forth, right? So I think Flipkart is a great example of a company that, right set of founders. Obviously, the timing was right, but really very, very insightful about how to adapt a business and build a business around the unique needs and challenges that Indian consumers have, right? And I think, and by the way, we have so many examples in the internet space. I mean, everybody likes to talk about Google and Facebook and Twitter, but the reality is, if you take the travel space, the first, second, and third companies in online travel are Indian companies: Make My Trip, Yatra, and Clear Trip. If you take matrimonial, a space that never existed anywhere else in the world, everybody else has dating sites. We have matrimonial sites, and every dating site that launched in India failed. Why? Because the consumer's different, right? And so on and so forth. So I do think that, look, and I strongly believe this, we can build literally hundreds of billion-dollar companies by addressing these amazing challenges that we have that are at scale. I'll give you another example. There was a company called Redbus that got sold last year for $100 million. Before Redbus launched, there were no search queries for bus tickets in the world. So when we look at all our queries, there are no. Why? Because the US has one bus operator called Greyhound. And when I was in college, I used to take that. It was miserable. You don't want to go on Greyhound. So you can always get a ticket on Greyhound. India has 5,000 private bus operators, and getting a ticket is mission impossible. So what do these guys do? They figure out a business model, right? Combination of software plus process and over time consumer marketing to create this seamless product that helps you buy a bus ticket without having to stand in line and not missing the bus. That company goes from nothing to millions of users in no time, right? And what's amazing us is, how many of these opportunities we have. And by the way, now there are bus ticket aggregators in every emerging market. Every emerging market has a bus ticket, but nobody talks about this. But guess what? That's a very interesting thing. Now let me come to around angel funding. Look, I'm a very angel investor. When I moved to India in 2006, I did one investment because I couldn't find companies to invest in. Okay, I was an angel investor in the US for 20 years. Now, actually, the environment has changed probably 10x, if not 100x. 2 years ago, there were 100 funded technology startups. Last year, we had 200. We launched this thing called NASCOM, 10,000 startups. We got a lot of energy around it, etc. However, the challenge is some of the policies, and Arun, this may not have been in your regime, have not helped. The startups now get taxed on angel funding. How can that be? So guess what? Indian entrepreneurs are very smart. So now we don't incorporate companies here. Now they incorporate in Singapore. Why? Because why would I pay tax on angel funding, right? So take another one in the internet space, the IT Act. The IT Act basically says if you're trying to build a platform company, an intermediary company like a Facebook or Twitter or a Google, you're liable for all kinds of things. Okay?
Yeah.
WhatsApp had 55 employees when they got sold to Facebook for $19 billion. The legal environment in India is so challenging. I have more than 55 lawyers. Okay, so if WhatsApp got launched in India, they would have had 55 lawyers and no product, right? Because we have all these issues. So I think one is really the funding environment, but I think we need to look at the dozens of specific laws and regulations that just make it difficult. It's difficult to start a company here. In the US, I can incorporate a company in 15 minutes. In Singapore, it's 2 days. Here, it's months if I'm lucky.
Right. Rajan, just one question. I just want to take you back to the question that we were talking about fundamental research. We can go back to the sexy and glamorous part about the Flipkarts and the business models, but I've always wondered about the fundamental research. Now, if I understand you correctly, and this is a question, what you're saying is let's build companies that will be large, will have scale and ability to spend, and then maybe you could get that kind of cutting edge research from them, because who would have thought that Google would be sponsoring and producing and researching a driverless car? You would think that would come out of a DARPA lab.
Yeah.
That would come out of a government lab. Google is doing it. So do I hear you correctly saying that let's go slow, let's first focus on these business models because we have the scale to do it, create an enabling environment, regulations, as you said, and financing, and then when they get to scale, when you get to $100 billion, then you can do the kind of research that you are affording and you are able to do. Is that your thesis?
So Anand, I'm not saying we should wait a decade, right? But what I am saying is when we think about, everybody's got this fascination with Google's search engine, right? I mean, we didn't cure cancer yet. So, we just help people search better. So I'm not saying we should only focus on this. I do think India should focus on fundamental research. But my view is, we need two things. We need PhD programs that are real. Okay, I mean, you can't do advanced science with no PhD program. We have no PhD programs of any meaningful scale, right? We need to now invest even in our master's programs. we need to actually focus a lot more on the cutting edge of science. I'll give you an example. I funded 2 machine learning startups in India. Between the 2 of them, we are trying to hire 4 machine learning guys. 3 of them we brought from the US. Why? We can't hire a machine learning guy. Machine learning is not solving cancer. Machine learning is, but you can hire hundreds of. So hang on one second.
Rajan,
one is the education system, but it's not K through 12, what we call employability. I'm talking about PhD programs in specific fields. So that's one area. I think the other area, Anand, is companies. I do believe that Indian companies are already at a scale where they can invest hundreds of millions of dollars to do disruptive innovation, right? I think Mahindra is a great example, right? Reliance is another great example. Look at the Tata Group. Can the Tata Group invest $500 million a year to drive disruptive innovation? The answer is absolutely yes. But it does require, I think, a point of view that says, I'm going to take a 10-year view, and I'm going to, like, we don't have, by the way, even Google X, which is where we get driverless cars, Google glasses, balloons that give internet from the sky. These are not R&D labs. They are very, very focused, as Arun said, on solving a problem. Right. We are going to deliver internet from the sky. Okay, what does that take? Yeah. We assemble a small team of the right 4 or 5, and they are deep experts. Right? And that's the issue. This is the other issue we have here is we can't find these deep experts, which I think goes back to the education system. So Anand, I'm not saying we should do one or the other, but I do think we can do 100 times more on the first one, which is solve these massive problems with business model innovations, etc. On the other side, I do think education and getting, let's say, the top 10 companies in India, they can all afford to spend a couple of $100 million to.
But why aren't they spending? You see, so I think some very critical questions are coming up. Yeah, Chanda, you can respond.
Yeah, I was saying that actually when we look at India, in fact, we have to do not 1 or 2, but at least 3 things. One is keep thinking of these ideas like the Flipkart and the travel portal and so on and so forth. The second is the companies keep thinking of adopting technology and changing business models. And the third is invest in that fundamental research. I think in a way all 3 are happening, but they're all 3 happening much less than what the requirement and potential of India is. So again, I think across the ecosystem, everybody has to participate. When I spoke about education, I mean, one is you create creativity in that 18-year-old who thinks of the next search engine. But you also have to, as Rajan said, look at our PhD programs and say, are they engaged in research?
I understand.
Similarly, while you have something where the government would put in a lot of money, but I think larger companies should be and also are, investing in fundamental research. I don't think our large pharmaceutical companies, or for that matter, auto, production companies are not investing in R&D. But, a lot more needs to be done. Plus, then there are also private sector who can do smaller initiatives. For example, people like us, while we do not really invest in fundamental research, but we run very small programs to say people from the education institutions will come and we run a competition to say, will come and show us 10 innovative ideas, we'll select 2 and then we'll fund those, and if the idea works, we'll use it. Now, those smaller limited initiatives.
Chanda, there is that approach, that there are small limited steps that we can take. But I think what we are talking about here is about India being the next innovation superpower.
Yes.
So, and I think we need to take some very drastic leaps. And I think we're getting some interesting, challenging thoughts up there coming in from Rajan. And Rajan, I would just say that someone like you, who understands what Indians can do, then you should do something to invest in the innovation so that the next Google class kind of technology gets developed from India. What do you say, Rajan? A lot of this cutting edge technology comes. So everyone can do things at different levels. But Rajan, it's not just that. I want to just go on a slightly bigger issue at this stage, is that the problem in India, and I appreciate everything that you're saying, but you know what the problem in India is, Rajan? The problem in India is that failure is too expensive. You cannot afford to fail. Or whether you're a student, a cricketer, wherever, only the top 0.1% achieves anything, and the rest of the people, get left aside. So I want to raise that question here, which is that the risk of failure in India is too costly, and nobody wants to fail, and that may be the reason why we don't innovate our education sector, why corporations don't fund people who are not giving them absolute sure shot guarantee of success. You want to take that? Okay, you take that. Then
I want to say something concrete about
it. Yeah, go ahead. No, the risk of failure being too high in India, is it only in India? Is it abroad as well? And if it is only in India, how do we get over it?
I think building a culture of risk-taking, takes a very long time. But, the first step to that is to have role models. Again, I came back after 20 years, 2006, I go to Bangalore. Nobody wants to be an entrepreneur, right? We're now 9 years later. I go to Bangalore now, and I can't tell you, every time I go, everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. I mean, that's in 9 years, right? So I want to tell you because I'm like deeply on the ground. So at least in the tech sector, what we are now seeing is graduates who are graduating, or somebody who's 23, 24, 25-year-olds who are working in big companies actually want to be entrepreneurs, right?
Great.
The other thing, and by the way, the single biggest driver of that is role models, right? Today, if you look at the Bansal brothers, or you look at Kunal Bal, or you look at Naveen Tiwari, who's built a $2 billion company. The second largest global mobile ad network is Bangalore-based. Okay, I mean, this is a company that competes with Google and everybody else in the world. Bangalore-based, and he's in his 30s, right? So, and there are about 15 or 20 of these guys who these young entrepreneurs can now look up to and say, you know what, they did it. And when the parents say, don't be silly, don't do this, they say, well, do you want me to be like him? Or do you want me to be, like this other guy, right? So I think, look, that's not to say we don't have it, but also I want to tell you, what's happening in India is very, very interesting. The energy among at least the engineering communities, the software communities that we're seeing is very, very interesting. So what we need to do is obviously take that and make it another 10x from where it is today, but also have it permeate not just a software engineering community, but across every single discipline, every single industry, so we get it. So obviously, do we have a culture where risk taking is bad? The answer is absolutely yes. But that doesn't really help. The question is, what can we do? And I think the great thing now is we are already beginning to see it in tech. And for us, that's very, very exciting. Last thing is, in terms of Google, look, we are very clear. The biggest innovations in India will not come from global companies. They cannot. Because we have global platforms, right? I can't go solve the bus problem, which is actually $1 billion problem to solve, right? So our role, the role we are playing is we are doing a huge amount of work to catalyze the ecosystem, right? So NASSCOM 10,000 startups, we were the leading partner. We're launching a whole set of other things. We're doing a massive amount of work around cultivating entrepreneurs. We connect them with our engineering teams. And we're also, I think to Chanda's point, what we are doing is making sure that, for instance, right, my number one goal is simple. I want to connect 500 million Indians on a smartphone. Because my view is if we do that, then another 100 companies can be built because we'll have 500 million connected consumers. And all of a sudden, we could start building that, right? So that's sort of our view in terms of Google and what we are trying to do to catalyze this.
Yeah. Arun wanted to respond.
Yeah, I want to say three things. One is about risk taking, and we're talking about entrepreneurs. Yeah, we found that the bankruptcy laws in India, especially for small enterprises, are completely broken. They're non-existent. So when you talk about the risk in the United States, you can declare yourself bankrupt and start a life again, and it's okay. You can't do it here. Yeah. And we are looking after bigger companies. We have ways to go reconstruct them and so on. There's nothing for the small ones. So that's one. And we have to work on that if you want to encourage the entrepreneurs and risk taking. Number two, we talked about the education system. And as Rajan was saying, it has to work on real things. Now, three institutions have to connect with each other. The educational institutions, the corporations, and the government. In the US system, like we said, if you are into basic research or metals research, the PhD students, the professor is supposed to get grants and funds for those programs. Where does he get them from? He sells it to a corporation. You have a need, I can work on your problem. Or the government and the defense and so on. So the three are connecting and supporting each other to do that. In our case, our corporations, because they don't think the universities are good, are going elsewhere to get it. But we have to support each other. And I give you something and build you, and then I will learn also how to do it. Now the third point, which is the one that Rajan said about the legal and laws. We did propose from the National Innovation Council a innovation fund to address that last mile problem, especially where the innovations are those in which you can't in the business capture all the monetary returns, social innovations particularly. So returns are not that high in terms of the financial returns. So we created this. It's taken us 2 years and more to argue with the Ministry of Finance and MSME and law and stuff to get a good idea.
Take it out of the government.
But I want to say, in the area of biotech, we have a fund that was created, which is managed by industry and the government together, and they say it works very well. So we come to say, in this area, government can do it, why can't you do it elsewhere? The system just doesn't want to learn from itself, even our own. Scale up that experience to do that. So we come down to, I do think, that certainly the state, the government is not a very good learning system, an innovative system, but even the connections between ourselves, we're not learning very effectively together.
Yeah, we're not. You know, I have a lot of questions coming in from outside. With your permission, I'd like to take a few. Okay, you can take that, Chanda. Anyone can take that, actually. Parthasarthi Mishra, Parthasarthi Mitra from IIT Kharagpur is asking, what the government and the private sector do collectively and individually to take our IITs and IIMs to the level of institutions like the MIT and the Harvard Business School.
To take what?
To take our IITs and IIMs to the level of institutions like the MIT and the Harvard Business School.
You know, if you look at Harvard Business School, and I've been on the board there, the key to its success is alumni support.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental growth engine of the Harvard Business School and of a lot of Ivy League institutions. It is about resource. It's about pumping that resource back into the college. And I think that's beginning to happen here. It's not going to be the government alone, which I think will be music to your ears. It's when alumni come back and start being generous and start giving back from what they have earned. And there's a substantial number of very high net worth IIT graduates around the world. They are giving back. That's when you're going to see a perpetual motion machine. And it's not only as I said, these are not supported by government, they're supported by endowments. Then the second part of success when you come to MIT is projects funded by the government, which are then handed over to these private institutions for cooperative research. So they have two sources of money and funds. It's from alumni and it's from large government projects. No matter how much you beat up on government or not, the fact is, we cannot end this conversation and let government off the hook.
No, you can't.
It's all right to say private sector will do it, keep the government out. You remember it was in vogue at one stage to say IT has grown in spite of the government, keep government out, minimize it, nothing will happen. To me, that's nonsense. Why do we elect governments? They are meant to fuel change. So government has to step up to bat and say, it is part of my job to have a long-term vision. It is part of my job to set targets and to say I will allocate resources. But where they have to be enlightened is, let's work with the private sector to do that. Let's work with centers of excellence. If there is a center of excellence within government, terrific. The recognition that I think you want is that increasingly the centers of excellence are outside. But the resources still with the government.
No, the point, the only point I was asking is about whether we can think differently, you know. And there's another couple of questions which are interesting. Anand, I'll throw one at you. This one comes for you from Baidyanath from Mumbai. He says, when he was in his 20s, would any Indian parent have considered getting their daughter married to Steve Jobs? Do we have the stomach for passionate rebels?
You know, interestingly, first I'm going to be a little tongue-in-cheek. The sad part is that even earlier, an Indian parent might have said Steve Jobs because he was a white foreigner, okay, which is part of the malaise, because we look abroad for everything. We don't have any self-esteem. But quite apart from that, you're right. They wouldn't have taken somebody जो बेकार था, जो इसका काम धंधा नहीं है, they certainly wouldn't have done that. But let's not knock them. After all, what does a parent want? They want success. As Rajan said, they need one generation of business people to make a serious amount of money from entrepreneurship. If the Bansals come in today, you can bet your bottom dollar that a mother will go and say, oh, is this guy doing a Flipkart? Is that the kind of thing he's doing? So the point he raises on role models becomes very, very significant. But what I'm hoping will happen, the answer eventually should be that when somebody says, would you want your daughter to marry, that she should say, no, my daughter needs 5 years because she's incubated. Now the next question comes for you, Chanda, and it's coming from Vishal Anand, which raises another question of whether we are thinking big enough. You see, we think of doing something that will apply globally from India, but we are not looking at our geographical region. And this question comes from Vishal Anand. He asks, given that the Indian middle class, and I don't necessarily agree with Vishal, but it's a good question, given that the Indian middle class is still neither high in number nor in disposable income, should we think of innovation more at a South Asia, Southeast Asia level and cooperate accordingly like a geographical bloc? So assert ourselves more by expanding the market in which our innovations can work.
Well, I think expanding markets always helps, but where I don't agree is that India, the numbers are not large enough. I think India numbers are large enough that gives us all the opportunity to try all scale and all kinds of business.
Okay, fantastic. But this question comes for you, Rajan. It's coming from Urvashi Singh from Guwahati, and she's asking you that, Rajan, you have worked with McKinsey, Dell, Microsoft, Google. Does the innovation DNA differ from company to company, or does the core DNA remain the same?
Yeah, look, I think the innovation approach and the framework actually differs not only by company, by industry, right? So if you look at Dell, they were extraordinarily successful at fast following. So they would pick an industry that's already established, and they would say, how do we disrupt this industry? And then kind of go after it, right? And then if you look at Google, we're really at the other end of the spectrum, where we say, look, how can we create new industries? How can we, solve, really solve massive new problems and go where nobody's gone before? So I think by the way, they're all innovative companies, I think, but the approach to innovation and the goals are actually quite different. And I think it works. All models work. The key is having a model and executing it superbly.
Yeah, absolutely. I have lots of interesting questions coming in. This question is for Mr. Mahindra. Zahir Sheikh is asking you, my question is for Mr. Mahindra, sir. Sir, your Mahindra Rise contest for finding the next Indian startup is a good initiative. However, he says, 8 out of 10 startups go bust in their first 2 years. Shouldn't we be teaching our entrepreneurs how to look ahead in failure?
No, agree. And 8 out of 10 failing is a reasonable percentage. It's a global percentage. So I'm not sure, Zahir, I understand your question, but should we be asking them to prepare for failure? If I understand your question right, I think it is at the core, and it goes back to the cultural issues, Arnab, that we were discussing.
Absolutely.
I want to put forward one proposition. When I look back at my own history, and when I look at what prevented me from being more daring or entrepreneurial, it is too much of deference to authority in India.
Right.
And it goes back, in my opinion, back to our ancient past, to the Guru Shishya Parampara. Now I might get a lot of brickbats for questioning our old tradition. But if you really look at that, to us the idea of learning and wisdom comes by sitting at the feet of your professor and repeating what he or she told you. It was terrific in a day when there was no technology, when there was no paper, and it was a way of disseminating knowledge through generations. It is a miserable model to have today. What I think we need is, we have to have people as young as, at any age, at the youngest age, question. Not rudely, not offensively, but it goes back, Chanda, to your question about education. If I have to say, one way do we change the education system, right from kindergarten, do we encourage children to question, not just authority, but question what they are told. If we can get that right and create a culture of questioning, you will have a very virtuous cycle set into place, and people will then begin to accept failure also. It will be a natural consequence.
No, I think, and just a comment, it's not a question coming in from Vikram James, who says, with the world's biggest and most powerful software company choosing an Indian as its head, and almost every other company in the Forbes 500 opting for an Indian in one of its top posts, does any doubt remain about India's potential? At the same time, the question also comes, Arun, and maybe you want to take that and Rajan can follow up on it, that how many Indians are very good at executing, right? How many Indians take ownership for their own ideas and create those companies? It's just a thought which comes up to my mind. I mean,
no, I think that's what
another person who's asking a question is saying that, why are we focusing on IITs and IIMs? Why do we assume that only the best innovations only come from the IITs and IIMs?
Completely.
I think both, yes. The first one I think we've been talking about, that if a person in India gets an idea, and there are many, as I said, there are millions and millions of ideas, do they have an ecosystem which can enable them to grow the idea? So if I go to California, I can get the money, I can get the support, I can get the testing, the culture is, and the ecosystem is available. Out here, that ecosystem is not available to me. So that's, we got to create the ecosystem that, we got very bright people. If you talk of jugad, our Indians are capable of finding a solution when it seems impossible to have a solution. That is real innovation. But they can't grow it, like we said, because the ecosystem doesn't support it. So I would say that's what we got to change, and we will get more innovations growing to scale and solving the problems of our millions of years.
It comes back to that ease of doing business.
Absolutely. It does. And some of those who are following this conversation, I'm actually quite happy. There's so much feedback coming in. Some of them are responding to things that you're saying. For example, Seema Singh says, in response to Mr. Mahindra's question, why don't we have Bell Labs like innovation? She says, because the government system perpetuates paper publishing, even poor quality. No incentive system to reward researchers who want to commercialize their ideas. They get subtly penalized for doing so. So they're actually sort of responding, and they, it comes, the whole question emerges of a system where, you fear failure, right? And you have no incentive to want to succeed, and there are very few people ready to hold your hand.
That's why I come back to fearing authority.
Yeah.
You fear failure because you fear a figure out there tokening you for that failure.
Absolutely.
We have to believe in ourselves. You have to dare to dream. You have to dare to question.
Yeah.
If you can start that at the primary level, people will not fear some mythical authority figure coming in and saying,
you think it's a mindset problem?
It's a mindset problem, completely.
And I would say it's not just dare to question, it's also you dare to put forth your ideas. I mean, there are otherwise organizations that do not even encourage people to put ideas. I mean, questioning is the next step.
Can I put a question for you? Yeah. Jayaprakash Meena asked a question. Why is the education loan rate greater than a car loan? Which car is more important than education in India? That's a smart one, actually. Jayaprakash Meena, you can both answer that. And he has his lips sealed on this one.
No, I'm not Chief of Financial Services. Go ahead. Happy to defer the question to her.
You want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes by saying that, when you have a car, you have a physical asset.
Exactly.
Right? When you have an education, you need to be moving with the person. Yeah. Again, the issue here in India is that when you want to fund education, you realize that the best of the students who can do something with their lives are actually gone away. Yeah. And you cannot, get down to collecting loans from them when they've done their basic education here and gone away to States. So if we really had ease of doing business and the ecosystem much better in India, you knew that your education would result into many positive results in India itself.
But Chanda, one input to give you, we run something called the KC Mahindra Education Scholarship, which is for scholarships going abroad. It's not scholarship, it's a loan. But it's an interest-free loan payable when able. And it's interesting, every year a bulk of the scholarships we give out, the new loans we give out, come from the loans repaid. We have no NPAs. And these are people who've gone around the world. So when you go to an honor system and you say, we're giving you an interest-free loan, when you make your money, pay us back, every year we get the money.
Yeah, the similar experience we have is when we run the banking training programs. Actually, in a way, it's like an interest-free loan. We pay for the entire cost of that training program and say, you're free to join anywhere you want. Yeah. A lot of people just join us and then their loans get paid out of the salary. Yes, absolutely. So once the education leads to employable opportunities that you can see,
it's better than
then that's where the quality of
absolutely. Which takes me to the next question, which is coming from Yash Oswal, who asks, Rajan, I'd like you to take this. Everything is getting linked up in the conversation. I don't know, Rajan, if you're following it. We are all talking about building those linkages. Chanda Kochhar just said, when the education leads to employability, or then we find it something worthwhile investing in. Yash Oswal asks, why don't Indian engineering institutes focus on innovation and practical projects more than theoretical knowledge and academic marks?
Yeah, I think it's it's a good suggestion. One of the questions was, Anand answered about Harvard. I mean, I went to MIT, and MIT is really about applied science. And they get their funding from companies and governments because it's applied science. 1991, I worked on high definition television. It launched in 2001, right? So for 10 years, it got funded by the Japanese and the US government. So I think it absolutely is something that our engineering institutions should do, especially at the undergraduate and the graduate levels, is to focus also on, applied science. What's very interesting is, we produce actually pretty good computer science theorists, but when you actually have them then move to writing code, especially code that can break boundaries,
that's right,
it gets to be quite challenging. And I think it's because of the learning model.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we need to? What about organizational structures, Arun? One of the thoughts which come is, do we need to flatten our organizational structures to encourage innovation quicker?
Absolutely. Look, this is almost a cliche now. Flattening, and we moved from flattening though, which is merely about taking lines on a white paper and changing an organogram.
Yes.
And I could do that tomorrow and say I will have 100 VPs or 100 SVPs and everybody is an SVP. You achieve flattening. But Arnab, I want to come back to this. This is about mindset. Does the CEO really want to allow questions? You can change an organization structure with a stroke of a pen and say, hey, I'm flat. Everybody's got the same designation. But if the CEO doesn't want to listen to people, you're not going to change. The new model was Google. There's that famous movie, The Internship, about people working at Google.
Yes.
It's about, once again, the idea of delegation, of empowerment, of allowing people to think freely, to free up their minds and to question. I'm sorry, I'm beginning to sound like a stuck record, but unless you have an organization where the leaders believe in allowing questioning, you're not going to change anything by flattening organizations.
So that's the second thing. It's very important. Look, you flatten, right? Coordination is an issue, connecting and coordinating. We make hierarchies because the hierarchy coordinates us. So if you reduce it, then people have to link laterally, and it comes back to the skills to work with others to create organizations laterally that work. This is the missing skill in India, if I might say so. We talked about the government within itself. I would say it is within a large hierarchical organizations. You can flatten easily, but you'll find that you can get chaos unless you build in the processes and the skills to work with others as a team to produce a result.
Yeah, therefore, you have to have a culture where organization listens. You also have to have some kind of process where these bright ideas are actually sifted through, worked upon, and so on and so forth. And again, I think the culture of listening is very important, not just for the organization, but you have to train your people to listen to the customer.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
The best innovative ideas come from what the customer
Absolutely.
wants.
Yeah.
So first of all, your people at the ground level have to understand what
How to
the
listen.
customer wants, how to listen, and then bring in those
Get
ideas.
that kind of feedback.
Completely agree.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Now, the other question which comes up is that most American corporations, they set up labs in colleges, in universities. They give them the funds. They give them the facilities, then they disengage from it. Right? Why don't we do that, Anand, here? I mean, why, and we are very content with increasing the number of IITs and IIMs, but why don't Indian corporations go and set up the labs in
Look, first of all, it goes back to what I said. It's about competition. Why didn't Mahindra do it in the 80s and earlier?
Why didn't
There was no need, because you frankly had a license to produce X number of vehicles. You were protected from foreign competition. Why on earth would you spend money anyway?
But now,
these are rational beings. The moment we got hit by competition, we said, oh my God, we have to survive. And we were amongst the first to go out to IITs. Pawan Goenka himself, who now is the dean, the chairman of the board of governors of Chennai. We have a number of labs which are sitting out at the IITs. We were appalled when IIT people came and told us that we have these 10 ideas which are patentable. You guys are not coming. Do you know what? Samsung came and took it.
Yeah.
It's remarkable how many multinationals are out there. But Indians are following up. We have a number of these projects going. We have them even at the NID where I chair the board. Mahindra does a number of projects with NID. So it's happening.
so it's happening. You think it's changing
Happening.
right now?
Absolutely.
And
it's happening out of desperation.
It's happening out of
Because we are desperately trying to fight competition.
Yeah, which again is, it's very good that you are facing competition.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Because in India, the success stories, Rajan, the biggest success stories still come from large corporations or a handful of entrepreneurs. That's not the story in Silicon Valley. So what's the basic difference there?
Well, I think Silicon Valley really has an ecosystem, right? I mean, if you go back to all the various things we've talked about, Silicon Valley has Stanford, right? Half the startups in Silicon Valley, actually, they're California-based, come from Stanford grads, either current or past Stanford grads. It has a huge number of role models, right? And I think this role model thing we should never underestimate, because all the angel investors in the Valley are basically entrepreneurs or guys who work at companies like Google and Facebook and whatnot. So it's got really a large mentor network. It's got a lot of risk capital. By the way, we talked about angel, but actually, if you look at venture capital funds, we have 10 of them, right? And 10 venture capital funds is just not good enough. So we have no depth in our VC market. So it's got that. And then finally, I think it's amazing. I mean, we take an Indian startup team, and one of the things we've started doing now is saying, go spend 3 or 4 months in the Valley. It's got a mindset around, and I think Anand mentioned this, which is think big, right? It's not good enough to grow. One of the things I find interesting about India, our companies here, even large companies, they're happy with 20% because the world is growing at 5%. Well, we shouldn't be, because we should be growing like 100%. given the potential that we have. So so it's that mindset about we can build big businesses, we can kind of make it happen. And I think the last one is really failing is cool there, right? I mean, it's okay. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
Fail. So you fail, and then you walk into Starbucks, you got a new idea, and you meet 3 angel investors, and you're off and running. So I think it's this ecosystem, and it's all these different. And by the way, when you build a company, if it's a pretty good company, you'll get bought if you want to get bought by Facebook or Google or Twitter or Apple or HP. So it's all in there. And what's amazing is this couple of hundred square miles just creates electricity.
Yeah, more and more of the questions which are coming will give me a sense of how people are thinking is more people are asking what happens if we fail. And their fear of failure is massive. And the second thing is about education. Everyone's asking about education. Why are public and private universities not doing enough to build education? So I think we're locating certain issues out here. People are not feeling encouraged enough with our existing education system.
But as you said, we are joining the dots here, not because as Arun pointed out and Chanda pointed out, there is an ecosystem issue of bankruptcy laws, making it not so sort of heavily onerous if you do fail. Financially, there's a system to support you, and you have Chapter 11 equivalents go out. And the second one, which we are connecting the dots, is also the mindset and having authority figures accept failure. The mother and father must accept failure.
Absolutely.
They don't want to face Ma and who's saying, "Beta, you didn't succeed."
But answer this
Mothers
question.
and fathers have to change.
No, but answer this question anyway. And this question comes: how do I beat the fear of failure or stagnancy? Gist of my question is, and this comes from Ralph's arrow: how do I handle my situation when my business did not do as well as I perceived?
Let's ask Chanda to answer this.
Chanda,
because I'll tell you, she's both a banker who has to face somebody who failed or took a loan, and she's a mother.
Yeah,
and I'd like to answer, what would you say to your child or to somebody, one of his friends or her friends, who failed and took a loan from you?
Yeah, I mean, actually, you have so many instances as a bank where you say that someone took a loan and someone failed.
Yes.
Of course, from a banker's point of view, the way we look at it is, was it the person's bad intent or incapability that made the thing fail, or was it because all the assumptions changed, which is very possible in a business environment. You start with certain assumptions and all the assumptions change and things don't work out. So I always in fact believe that a great entrepreneur can make even a bad project work well.
Absolutely.
But a bad entrepreneur can mess up even a great project.
And Arnab, the media, let's come to you. I know you're the moderator.
Yes.
What bothers me is every time I'm interrogated and I'm saying, oh, you've got so many subsidiaries that are still making losses. They're startups. I mean, two-wheelers. Why are you getting into two-wheelers? Why have you tried this? They asked me the same questions when we got into hotels, which are $500 million businesses. Everybody is waiting to smell failure or to point at you if you're making losses, and the media is no less. Why can't we get the media to celebrate entrepreneurship? Media, financial media, to look encouragingly at people who are taking risks. And finally, to you, why aren't we making a world-class media organization? Why hasn't an Al Jazeera come out of it? I want to ask you that.
You're asking me that question. You're flipping the
I'm flipping it.
Okay. I think the time has come, Anand. And if we do not exploit our natural advantages, of a democracy, we are a democracy, China is not. Our unique advantage with English, right, and our tremendous knowledge of technology and television production, for example. Anand, I'm predicting here today in the course of this conversation that before this decade is over, you will have a world-class global news organizations. I'm not saying one, global news organizations operating out of India. It's just that we have to think big, and I think the time has come for some people to think big in that direction. So many questions out here. I'm truly flattered, and I think I'd like to thank everyone, Arun. I think people are so involved in this conversation. What this tells me is that there is a whole world out there which wants to break out. The time to break out has come. If we don't recognize it, we'll be missing the bus.
Absolutely. Yes, celebrating failure, just an idea thrown in. There's another group in India, not yours, I think it's not yours. They award failures.
Yes.
And you probably heard it too. But provided you have learned from the failure and are applying the lessons somewhere else.
Yes.
The US Army does this also. And I think this is part of education, as you say. Yeah. Let's do that. And the media then, please celebrate the failures, provided they also tell you what
Yes.
they've learned and are applying it.
Completely.
Then get over publicly being acknowledged for being a success though you failed.
Yeah.
Just change the
Because
culture.
you would be celebrating ideas.
That's right. It's
You
actually the
have to
idea.
celebrate ideas and
Exactly.
thinking. Yeah.
I completely, I like that phrase here. That's
Absolutely.
what media should be.
And I think, one last input I'll take from someone, we have a minute left. It says, Muhammad Danish says, innovation comes out when there is no fear of failure, but in our society, there's no tolerance for failure. You have to succeed at any cost. This mindset makes us follow rather than lead, and this is what should change.
100% agree.
100%
Nothing to add.
we agree on
Nothing to
that.
add.
So, last word we began, we'll wrap up with Rajan. Rajan, are we ready to take that great leap forward now? This conversation will be followed by a lot of people everywhere. Your closing thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I know. I think, look, when it comes to innovation, we should go big or go home. Good thing is we're already at home, so the only way we should go is go big.
Excellent.
And I would just say that risk of failure comes because there's too much competition and very little lack of resources. So
Yes.
everybody is trying to scramble. But let's make that lack of resources and that competition be the driving force to actually innovate.
Absolutely.
Go from jugad to jhakas.
Jugad to jhakas. I like that. You should have, Anand, you would have been an excellent copywriter. Thank you.
Whenever I fail, I'm winning the job.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Google and Mahindra for giving us this platform, and I'd like to thank all of you for following this wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.